We'll just chill. You right? No, it's all right.
Go for it.
You right? All right. We know that shield laws are vital for a free, independent and robust media which supports a strong democracy for all Queenslanders. And we want to make sure that Queenslanders who come forward with important but confidential information are also protected. That's why we've made strong reforms to our Evidence Act to ensure that there are shield laws in place here in Queensland that protect journalists and their sources. Those laws, which come into effect today, ensure that journalists cannot be compelled to give evidence or produce a document that identifies their source. And those laws apply in all of our courts and tribunals. But of course, there has been much debate about whether or not shield laws should extend to our corruption watchdog. And the government has committed to extending those shield laws to the CCC. And today, consultation is underway with key stakeholders to make sure we do that in the best way possible. Because, as I've said to many of you over many months, this is complex and we do want to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure that a shield law that applies to the CCC is clear, effective, and doesn't conflict with existing privileges, such as the privilege of confidentiality in the Act. We want to make sure that there are no unintended consequences. As recently noted in the Commission of Inquiry report into the CCC, the powers that the CCC have are coercive in nature, and they are exceptional in our system of law. And the reason they have such extensive powers is because it is notoriously difficult to detect and combat corruption and organised crime. So we have to make sure that shield laws, when they apply to the CCC, balance the fact that we don't want the CCC to be hamstrung in its ability to detect corruption and organised crime, whilst at the same time recognising that it is in the public interest at times for journalists and their sources to be protected. I also want to make it clear that right now most other jurisdictions do not extend their shield laws to corruption proceedings. So we want to make sure we get this right. That's why I'm very pleased that consultation will be underway today. We're giving stakeholders till the middle of October to tell us what they think is the most appropriate way to ensure that journalists and their sources are protected, even when it comes to the CCC.
Do you have any conversations with your counterparts in the state about introducing nationally consistent shield laws?
We haven't had those discussions at our meeting of Attorneys General, but now that consultation is underway, we'll be working with other jurisdictions and how their Evidence Act shield laws apply. But right now we know that it is a real mixed bag about how shield laws apply to corruption proceedings in other states, and that's why we are taking the time to consult and get this right.
Given it is so unclear in other jurisdictions about how this applies, do you think the states follow Queensland's lead on this?
I understand that there has been calls from the Media Entertainment Arts Alliance and other key stakeholders to ensure that there is consistency of shield laws across the nation. I think that makes sense, and I'm very happy to work with my counterparts on this issue.
Is there any possibility that these laws could be made retrospective in a bid to protect journalists?
We have no intention at this stage to make these laws retrospective. We want to make sure we get this right, that there are no unintended consequences. And I do think it is important that the government, now that shield laws are in effect in all of our courts and tribunals, we now take that next step to applying it to corruption proceedings.
Do we have to wait for this to be a second part, like when they're coming, when the laws are being?
Well, as I have said, this is complex, and we are now reviewing the entire regime of privileges under the CCC Act. So chapters 3 and 4 are under review. That contains the framework for privileges in our corruption proceedings, and so it makes sense to do that all together because, as I said, we don't want there to be unintended consequences. We also need to make sure that if someone is not granted a shield in the CCC, that they have an avenue for appeal to the Supreme Court. So recently we saw amendments moved in the debate for shield laws which apply to our courts and tribunals that didn't allow for any avenue of appeal. Like, that is just one example of why it's important to take the time to consult, because this is complex.
Under the proposal to extend these to
Who would?
How would a journalist be defined?
So we would probably define journalist as we have under the Evidence Act. So it's a broad definition that would encompass what most people consider to be journalists doing their job. So we would take the definition that we've already adopted in the Evidence Act, but now we just need to make sure that this shield law, as I said, doesn't conflict with existing privileges under the Act, and that there is a very clear appeal mechanism to the Supreme Court.
Do you want the CCC to take action on the Journalist Act?
Look, it's a matter that is currently before the courts and the CCC. It would be inappropriate for any Member of Parliament, let alone the Attorney-General, to comment on that case. I do understand that there are many concerns about that case, and that's why the government has decided to consult and extend shield laws to the CCC, but we do have to get it right.
When do you think you'll actually see these laws come into effect? Like you said, the shield laws coming into effect today, the CCC provisions, when is the likely?
So we're consulting from today. We've given key stakeholders till the middle of October to come back to us with their feedback. Then, of course, we would need to draft legislation and consult on an exposure draft. So I'm hoping to introduce a bill in the first half of next year. But as I've said, we need to take the time to get this right.
You said previously that the extending the shield to CCC hearings could have unintended consequences. What does that mean?
Well, as I've said, because there is already a framework of existing privileges under Chapters 3 and 4 of the Act, we need to make sure they don't cancel each other out or how they interact with each other. We also, of course, as I've said, need to ensure an appeal mechanism. Normally with a shield law, in a court or tribunal, it is the presiding judge that would make a decision about whether or not the shield is set aside or granted. If it's the CCC, we want to make sure that there is an appeal mechanism to the Supreme Court.
And understanding that consultation is still underway, is it your view that this will happen?
We have made a commitment to extend shield laws to the CCC. The best way to do that is what we're consulting on.
Just on casinos, is there any update you can give us on the Charter investigation?
No, that investigation is underway by the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation, and because Palaszczuk are a close associate and shareholder of Star Entertainment Group, the independent review can also look into these matters.
Do you expect the Office of Liquor and Gaming to come to the ABC for any documentation, or will they undertake their own inquiries?
I'm not sure. I'm happy to make those inquiries.
Just in terms of housing, why won't the government look to a crisis like the opposition has?
Look, I understand there is much work underway across government. We know that there is enormous pressure on our housing system. As the Domestic and Family Violence Minister, I meet with stakeholders regularly, and the Minister for Housing. We've set up a joint roundtable to make sure that victims of violence are prioritised. But there is huge pressure. But there's huge pressure nationally as well. This is a national crisis. We need all governments to come together. And I understand that the Premier and the Housing Minister will have more to say on this issue very soon.
Do you want it to be a national summit?
I understand that the Premier and the Housing Minister will have more to say on this soon, but I guess my point is this is happening right across the country. There is a lot of work being done by the state government, by the Housing Minister, and she and the Premier will have more to say on this very soon.
Do you think Wellcamp could be used for a temporary facility?
I understand that there are many options being considered for Wellcamp and Pinkenbar for that matter, and again, we'll have more to say on that very soon.
Tony, you've said that you'll look to introduce coercive control criminalisation legislation at the end of next year. Any thoughts as to whether that timeline needs to change given what we've heard from the police culture inquiry and things like that?
So the first tranche of legislative reform outlined by the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force was due to be introduced this month. That will now be next month. And that's about modernising definitions in our Act so that it is very clear that coercive control is part of domestic and family violence. It's modernising laws such as stalking to better capture technology-facilitated abuse. But introducing a criminal offence of coercive control, very clearly the task force said we need to make sure that there is extensive training and an awareness campaign in the community before that becomes a crime, because there will be many unintended consequences. So, we are making sure that in accordance with the timeline set out by the task force, our panel of experts chaired by Margaret McMurdo, we do all of that work in preparation so that when this crime is introduced, we actually can successfully hold perpetrators to account and better protect victims.
Certainly legislation may not be introduced next year, but resolution
No. We are absolutely committed to following the timeline set out by the task force. So, as I said, the first tranche of legislation will be very soon, and introducing a bill to criminalise coercive control will be next year.
The task force was very clear that there was that body of work, and they included this inquiry. Given what we've heard from the inquiry, given what seems to be a situation that needs some level of remedy within the police force in terms of addressing some of those cultural issues. And so there's simply no scope to push it back if you deem that there are issues that need addressing first.
Look, I think clearly we need extensive training for our first responders, police, our health system, our domestic and family violence services. I don't want to preempt any findings of the Commission of Inquiry into police and how they handle domestic and family violence matters, but quite clearly the task force has found, and some of the evidence we've heard, is that there does need to be more training to support our first responders, and we have built that into the timeline, and the task force built that into the timeline when they suggested that we introduce the bill next year.
So obviously there's a public holiday next Thursday. Constitutionally, Queensland has to follow a certain hold-up, don't they?
Absolutely. There will be a public holiday next Thursday in Queensland, and I understand advice is being provided about the best way to ensure that happens.
Some people are quite concerned about whether elective surgery will go ahead on that day. What can you tell me?
I'm happy to get you some advice about whether elective surgery will go ahead on that day.
Of course, we've seen, I guess, with years that Germany were a few changes, Youth Council, King's Council. Can you describe, I guess, the changes that departments, like the Department of Public Relations, will need to make in terms of that change?
Well, that change actually happens automatically. The Bar Association issued a statement on Friday. Queen's Council now become King's Council automatically. So barristers simply need to update their LinkedIn profile, really. So it's not a big change. It just happens automatically.
The Queen's birthday holiday, we normally see that in Queensland in early October, even though the Queen's birthday was back in April. King Charles' birthday is actually in November. Now it'll be the King's birthday holiday. Is there any changes to that?
There are no changes. The Queen's birthday holiday will go ahead, and at this time there's no plans to change the name.
There's also some talk around emergency services personnel, things like badges, uniforms. What can you tell us about that?
Again, I think all government departments are getting their advice. Of course, there are protocols put in place between the Commonwealth and the states that have been in place for many decades. So, all government departments will follow that advice. But at this stage, I don't have any of the details about what is involved in each department with the change of a monarch.
Sorry, just to clarify, you said don't know plans to change the name of the date?
Not for this holiday that's coming up very shortly.
Yeah, and then after that, it'll go Queen's birthday.
I'm not sure. I'm happy to get that advice. But again, I think all government departments are now working through this change. This hasn't happened in, most of our lifetimes. So there is a protocol to be followed for all of these changes, and that will be communicated as each department gets that advice.
Are there any talks for a permanent monument for either the Queen or for Charles?
I haven't heard of any such discussions, but we'll obviously let that take its course. Of course, as I said, there are protocols now in place. It is still, a time of mourning for the Queen, but I guess those discussions will take place after that period. Thank you.